My name is Ken Doxey, Vice Provost for Academic Affairs. I'm pleased to have the chance to talk with you today about promotion and tenure process. Also in the room and making it possible for this meeting to occur, besides Gretchen Drew, who is on camera, is Pam Palaniuk from Academic Affairs. Sonia Runberg and our student assistant Amber greeted you out in the entryway, I believe. Zach is the guy in charge of the sound, so if you can't hear me, it's his fault, not mine. The intention for this meeting is primarily to talk about promotion and tenure file preparation from the perspective of the people who put the files together. Excuse me, well, I see what else I should have told you. We're being recorded. We're going to post the slides online, which is good because you'll see that I trust me, I know how to make a good PowerPoint slide, and trust me, some of these aren't. But the intention was for this to be a written resource for you in essence. And so I'm going to talk through some things pretty quickly, but you can look at the detail at leisure if you're on time. And when we're done, if you could leave your name tag on the table, we will reuse the plastic bits and avoid contributing to the landfill. All right, so again, this is meant primarily for the perspective of those who will put files together, department heads, office managers, other support staff. I think we have some faculty in the audience, and that's absolutely fine. I will accidentally give you information about how to put together a promotion file from your perspective as well. Although we do have separate workshops that are more specifically targeting the faculty who are undergoing consideration for promotion or tenure. I have a lot of slides, and again with a lot of information. This is a workshop, and work is in the title. I decided I wanted to spend at least a little time in discussion with you. It's a large group, but I think we can still do that. And so my intention is to fly pretty quickly through a lot of information. I used some red type to highlight maybe the key messages on some of these slides, and we'll work our way to a conclusion, and then plenty of time for questions. If questions do arise in the course of these, feel free to interrupt me and ask. But again, I'm not going to try to be exhaustively detailed as I cover these topics, all right? Process begins in the winter term of the year prior to the promotion. So let's say I'm supposed to be reviewed for tenure, and that tenure decision has to happen by June 2016. Well, this term would be the term that my department head was supposed to be telling me that, hey, it's time for you to start getting your file together because we have to review you for a tenure decision that will happen more than a year from now. And if I haven't been on top of things, I'll be thinking, isn't that kind of early? I'm only in my 5th year, and that's supposed to be the end of my 6th year, but this is when it starts. Department heads under the CBA are required to notify faculty who must undergo review. Namely, that would be a required tenure decision. That's going to apply to someone who was hired here with no credit for prior service and is due for a tenure decision. Or it could be someone who was hired with credit for prior service and chose not to use that credit. If you look at their contracts, credit for prior service will list 2 dates. One is when tenure can be considered as an on-time process, and the second date is when a tenure decision is required. For those people for whom a tenure decision is required by June 15th of 2016, this is the term department heads have to tell those people that it's time to put your file together. For everybody else, the CBA isn't prescriptive, and some of our faculty, of course, aren't in the bargaining unit, although we're trying to treat everyone the same way. But this would be the time for a discussion by those candidates with the department head. Maybe it's an assistant professor with credit for prior service thinking of using that credit, so the tenure decision isn't required, but I'm thinking I'm ready. Maybe it's an associate professor looking at promotion to full professor. That review is never required, though we of course hope it will happen. This is the time for those discussions. Okay. During this term, and particularly next term, the candidate will provide some documents to support this process. I think I've got some details in here, but in particular it will be a CV and a statement of research, teaching, and service activity, and a few other things, and some recommendations for external reviewers. During the spring term and into the summer, the department or unit will identify external reviewers and contact them, collect reviews so that by the time of the fall term coming around, the package should be complete for departmental review, voting, and moving up the food chain. During the fall and winter term now, so again of this coming academic year, the unit would forward the file to the school or college for that level of review. That then comes to academic affairs and to my office during the winter term and into the spring term, and there are specific deadlines that I'll show you in a minute for these, for the final stages of review. Nothing in red on here, so I won't spend much time, but I will note that by September 15th, Academic Affairs finds it important, you might understand why, for us to be able to anticipate what the workload is going to be for the Faculty Personnel Committee and the Provost in the coming year. So we will send a request out to you earlier, and by September 15th, we hope to hear from each school or college a reasonably solid list of who we should anticipate seeing files for regarding promotion and or tenure. This can change, of course. Sometimes associate professors decide not to go forward. Sometimes additional candidates come in. There's always hiring and so on, but a reasonably good estimate for what files we can expect to see. I've got to ask for a show of hands, I guess. First off, how many of you are directly involved in some way or another in preparing promotion and tenure files? Okay, most of you. How many of you have not done it before? There are a fair number, okay. But you've got a lot of experienced folks around you who can help you, and we're available one-on-one for consultation as well. The traditional thing to happen is you tell us, okay, we've got Professor X we're going to put up for promotion. Academic Affairs provides a set of colored binders, red, green, blue, and one or two blacks, depending on which school or college you're in. As the files are completed, the black file stays at the dean's level. If there were two black files, it's because the department wanted one also. The red, blue, and green get forwarded to Academic Affairs. In the long term, the red is the official retention copy. We archive it. We used to say forever or 75 years after death, but it's actually 10 years after the promotion decision is the official retention record. That might be something none of us realized before, too. So if you are in an office that retains promotion and tenure dossiers, the official state law regarding retention of such dossiers is destroy 10 years after final action. That action is almost always a promotion and or tenure, which is effective, well, they're notified on May 1st and it's effective September 15th. So if you have files that are older, say, than September 15th, 2005, you probably don't need to be keeping them, and actually you probably shouldn't be keeping them. In parentheses is the thing I want to get to today, electronic submission. It's the 21st century. I'm showing you slides like it was a slide projector, but I'm using a computer. We are implementing a process for digital submission of promotion and tenure files. Preparation, what materials go into these files will look very much the same, so my old slides are pretty useful, but the reason I want to go through them pretty quickly is so that I can talk you through the process of preparing a file digitally. For many of you, I probably don't need to tell you that because you probably are preparing the file digitally and then you're printing it and sending it to dinosaur-era Academic Affairs, where I have to tell you we then disassemble it, scan it, so that we have an electronic form for our Personnel Committee to look at. We think there's another way. Okay, some additional due dates. College of Arts and Sciences expects files to be received from departments by November 15th. Non-CAS departments by November 30th are expected to submit all their files to us regarding tenure cases. The wording on the web might be a little bit more abstruse. It says something like cases for which a negative decision leads to terminal notice. That doesn't mean cases where you're thinking of saying no. Those are tenure cases. Those are the only cases where this happens, okay? So tenure cases by November 30th. January 15th, the rest of the files from all except CAS, And CAS, the giant unit that it is, has the luxury of waiting until March 15th, except they don't really. If the CAS Dean's Office forwards all the CAS files to Academic Affairs on March 15th, there's no possible way on earth for the Faculty Personnel Committee to review them all and get them through the provost review of their recommendation and a final decision by May 1st. So we increasingly beg the CAS Dean and Associate Deans for file release as March 15th gets closer. But really we need them before then as much as possible. Let's look at the dossier roughly in order it'll be put together. And again, I hope in relatively abbreviated terms. If you go to the Academic Affairs website, you can find all this information and more. And you should get to know Gretchen Drew as we go through a comprehensive revision of the Academic Affairs website. And if she asks you if you would like to participate in a survey or a working group or one-on-one interview about how the website could be more useful, try to say yes. Candidate CV, signed and dated. We want in the file the version that was seen by the external reviewers. But this was prepared winter term this year, and the reviewers are going to see it over the summer, and then we're going to look at the file next year. Things happen for almost all our faculty, virtually all our faculty. They would like to update their files. That paper that was submitted is now in press. The one that was in press is now in print. The book contract was signed and accepted, and the book is done. These are important things. Updates are always welcome, ideally in the form of an update, not an entire new CV. My CV is 35 pages. If I update it a couple of times, my file's already about an inch thick. If I provide a one-page summary of the changes, my file stays manageable for the poor reviewers who have to look at it. And it's also easy to figure out what changed. I call it the Where's Waldo approach. If you send me a new 35-page CV and I know somewhere in here there's something different, I wonder where it is. So make it easy. I don't need to describe what the CV should contain for this group. I don't think. I do have highlighted in red more and more compliance with this notion, but still we do see a lot of CVs that don't list the date of graduation or the mentor's name. Why do we care about that? Well, mostly it relates to the selection of external reviewers. If you don't list your mentor and we ask your mentor to review your case, that's a conflict of interest. We don't ask mentors to review their former students' files for promotion and tenure. And if we don't know that they were the mentor and you're our faculty member and colleague, why didn't we know that? I don't like to look foolish. Okay, I'm not the one that asked for external reviews, but your department heads don't like to look foolish either. So if a CV lists this, we can help avoid those obvious conflicts. Oops. Okay, again, some things that you can read at your leisure. There are various forms of manuscripts. The one form of manuscript to avoid is the one that sounds like it's farther along than it is. And we all know we should be cautious about that. If I've got something that it's almost done, I'm going to say it's submitted because I'm going to submit it next Tuesday, and then I get sick. And the file goes to reviewers, and one of the reviewers happens to be the associate editor for the journal I claim to have submitted to, and I didn't get it submitted just yet. That doesn't look good. So we want honesty, of course, in terms of status. The book is in red because this remains one of the biggest sticking points for people, and we're trying to be as clear as possible. Whatever this says here, my translation of when is a book done is when it's done. And that means the manuscript is finalized and complete, possibly the exception of copy editing or galley-proof correction, and it's under contract. If either of those things isn't true, then it's not done. And although I'm a very trusting person, we don't have a guarantee that it will ever be done. The manuscript's complete, and I'm sure this publisher is going to accept it. Well, what if they don't? Or it's under contract, see, there's a signed contract, and it's just pending final revisions from the author. Well, I know you're planning to, but what if it doesn't happen? So this is a reason. I think this is a common definition. It's certainly one that makes sense to me is a book when it's done. Make sure your candidates include work in progress in their CV and in their statement. People are looking for, I use the word trajectory when I'm giving the workshops for faculty considering review for promotion or tenure. We're looking at where they're going, not just where they've been, but we want to use where they've been to predict where they're going to go in the future. Candidates should help us see that. Okay, the statement, same as what I said for the ZV, signed and dated. The version seen by the reviewers should be in the file. It's less common for these to be updated, but sometimes they are, and that's absolutely fine. Again, it's helpful to me as I review these files, and I think for other reviewers, if you can help us see what's different. Looking at what's in red here, again, you can read all the details now or later. Future plans, I just talked about how important that is. Here's a big one in red, this is a little bit different, although it's now been around for a year, a statement regarding contributions to institutional equity and inclusion. This was a new requirement under the CBA. If your faculty aren't in the bargaining unit, they're not technically required at this point to follow this rule. But know that our intention is for all our faculty to be reviewed under the same set of guidelines and expectations. So please consider requiring your faculty, whether or not they're in the bargaining unit, to provide this statement. This is a technical details workshop, but I want to tell you that Dan Hosang from Kodak, the Center on Diversity and Community, was here, may still be here. He's left his presence, and on your tables is a two-sided handout that I encourage you to take a copy of, and Kodak can provide more if you like, or it's not copyright protected, I don't think. This is a discussion about how, it's not how to put that statement in the file, so it doesn't strictly fit in this workshop, but it is a statement about how those sorts of statements might be reviewed and evaluated. I think that's, particularly in this transition time, really important information, so department heads, office managers, faculty who are here, make sure that you see this information and get it to your colleagues as well. I think we've done a very thoughtful and a very good job in terms of looking at what contributions to equity and inclusion might look like. We're continuing to work on providing guidance in that area, workshops, poster sessions, examples. What does it mean to demonstrate a commitment to equity and inclusion? Does it mean you have an African-American student in your research group? Does it mean you grade finals without regard to student racial origin or ethnicity? Of course we do those things, but what does it look like more holistically in terms of who we are and what we do? Next piece in the file would be the statement of waiver. This relates to Oregon state law that requires personnel files to be open to personnel, unless they specifically waive access to portions of the file. The standard practice here and at most universities is to request confidential letters of evaluation. We can't have confidential letters in a personnel file unless the faculty member has said that's okay. So there needs to be a waiver, and this happens before you request external reviews, where the faculty member makes a choice of either saying, thank you, but I want to retain access to all the materials in my file, to the other extreme of saying, although I recognize state law provides me access, I choose to waive access to my promotion and tenure dossier. And there could be a partial waiver as well. We provide wording for this on the Academic Affairs website, so you can look at that. As an administrator in your department, know that you should not pressure your faculty to choose one of these or the other. There may be institutional norms or departmental norms in your field. You're aware of those. You can make your colleague aware of those, but there's no pressure about this. Numerically, I'll tell you that almost all the cases we see are fully closed. We see a much smaller number where access has been retained for internal evaluations, but access to external reviews is waived. And we see a comparably small number of files where full access is retained by the candidate. Whatever the candidate chooses, that letter is on file before the external reviews are requested, and you need to inform the external reviewers of that waiver status. There have been a few cases before I started, fortunately, where reviewers were not notified of the waiver status. In fact, the waiver status hadn't been established by the time the reviews were requested. Confidential reviews were received And a candidate then said, actually, no, I want access to my file. So confidential reviews had to be returned. The reviewers had to be notified that we forgot to tell them that the candidate might see your letter. Do you want to withdraw your letter, revise it, or are you okay the way it is? And it makes us, have we established I don't like to look like I don't know what I'm doing? Okay. Neither do department heads. And that's what it looks like if you have to tell a reviewer later that you screwed up. Here's a sample. We don't need to read that one now, I don't think. Okay, again, this wording is available. Statement of duties and responsibilities. That's the next tab in the files that we prepare. Should be a simple statement as to what the expectations are. And I'd say that increasingly common, and I love it, is that it's simply a copy of the position description. I'm always impressed when a dean can find a position description for a candidate for promotion to full professor who was hired in 1972. But for those of us that have better organizational skills than I do, you can find those things. But so a statement of expectations for the job. Frequently, it's pretty short. Expected to teach a normal range of courses, conduct research appropriate to the field, and to provide appropriate service. Conditions of appointment. This one causes a lot more confusion. It really can be pretty simple. If it's a tenure case, provide the most recent contract. Make sure it's for the right person. I've only seen that done once, but make sure you're providing the candidate's contract. And sometimes there's a NAPO, sometimes there's something else. Really, if it can be the contract whenever possible, I like that because it's very clear. It says when a tenure decision is required. And review committees want to know that because we have somewhat different expectations if a candidate's coming up early or on time. Okay, so if it's a tenure case and the tenure decision is required by 2018, but I'm looking at it now, oh, well, it's 2 years early, so I'm looking for the exceptional qualities that made this an early promotion. Okay, the contract provides that in a very easy to find way. If it's a candidate for full professor, the conditions of appointment may be that there are no new conditions of appointment. Okay, there don't have to be any special conditions. If you have split appointments, you half time in chemistry, half time in physics, whatever, there should be a document that establishes who the tenure home is and how the review will be conducted. Chemistry will conduct the primary review. The faculty in the Department of Physics will review the case and provide a letter and vote regarding the candidacy, whatever it might be. Okay? There may be time extensions for childbirth, family leave, other matters, medical leaves. Those are documented in writing. This is a good place for that to be. And again, the focus primarily is making it easy for someone reviewing the file to understand what the case is. If you don't describe this and it's a tenure case and the person was hired in 2002 and it's now 2015, somebody's going to think, I don't know how to evaluate this case because I don't know what's going on. I picked dates that are maybe too far apart, but so in this section you find something that explains that the person was in a serious accident and was on medical leave for 5 years, whatever it might be. Now the reviewer knows what's going on. Teaching evaluation section is complicated. There's a lot of material that goes in here. There's a lot of material that goes in a supplementary file as well. Highlighted in red, the only thing I think I'll talk about here is what do we do when we are hiring somebody from somewhere else? Oftentimes we're hiring someone on a very short time clock before a tenure review here. Oftentimes we're hiring someone who's tenured somewhere else and we've got the file going early enough that we're hoping to have a tenure decision before the person even gets here. So you submit a file. In these cases, we're stealing somebody from somebody else. They're probably not going to be all that responsive to me if I write to them or call them and say, hey, we're hiring your chaired full professor of philosophy. We want to offer tenure. Could you send us their teaching evaluations? I think they'd be entitled to say no and maybe to gesture at me as well. candidates frequently have materials. The message here simply is that recognize that our review committees for tenure and promotion here at the University of Oregon are very interested in the full package, not just the scholarship or creative practice, but also the teaching, also the service. Whatever you can get us that helps us evaluate all of those things, and in this case particularly the teaching, is really appreciated. Maybe you don't have anything. Maybe the candidate really did not receive annual evaluations or quantitative scores from students. That's uncommon. Usually they have something. And although generally we prefer for the administrators in the department, so in this case the department heads would provide the teaching evaluation materials to the file, I'd rather have candidate provided materials than nothing at all. So as you're doing a senior level hire, see if you can coax these sorts of documents out of your candidates when you recognize that, yes, this is the person you're going to hire. Yes, the person's going to come here. Let's make it easy for our review committees. Okay, department's got to do a lot of things. You provide most of the material in the teaching section, honestly, and that seems to make sense. I trust my colleagues implicitly, but yet should a junior colleague who may have a mixture of excellent and less than excellent teaching evaluations be the one who chooses to put that package of information into the file, where there might be a temptation to omit a couple. So we avoid that by having the department provide. Yes, Peg?
And do you want the same amount of data on NTTF faculty?
I'm going to repeat questions to make sure they're captured. Do we want the same information for NTTF faculty? Whenever I have a simple answer for NTTF, I remind myself of how complex our NTTF pool is. If they're instructional NTTF, then yes, particularly those for whom their primary responsibility is teaching, then we want to make sure we do have the full teaching file. And I guess that question was specifically about hiring advanced people into these positions. But yes, whatever we can get. Maybe they're being hired with credit for experience that was not formal teaching experience, and there would be no teaching file, in which case that's simply what we've got. There are other places in the file that we'll get to where people can comment on teaching skills. I guess I'll point out the bottom of this one, peer evaluations. We're doing pretty well now, although pretty well after about 10 years after the Senate declared what peer evaluation frequency was expected for promotion cases is maybe not good enough yet. The expectation for a pre-tenure faculty member is to be reviewed at least once in each of the 3 years leading up to the tenure decision. So that would be in years 3, 4, and 5, because tenure decision happens in year 6. If we're talking now and you're taking notes and saying, oh, we haven't done a peer review for a professor who's coming up for tenure next year yet, it's not too late. It's too late to do it the way we expect you to do it, but it's not too late to do something. Try to, office managers, remind your department heads. Department heads, don't forget. Faculty, remind your department heads. If you're not being peer evaluated and you look at this time schedule and say, I should be, make sure that someone's doing it. It's technically the department head's responsibility. I'm working on putting together a department head training program, and to do that, one of these days you're all going to get a message, or the department heads will, saying, what's the one thing you wish you knew before you became department head? And I'm planning to develop some things around that. Sometimes people don't know they're supposed to do this, but they are. If you're a tenured associate professor, you're expected to be reviewed at least once every other year until you're promoted to full professor. What if they forgot on that? You've been an associate for 20 years and there haven't been any peer reviews yet. Well, it's not that useful to have 3 peer reviews of the same course in the same term. So if the mistake has been made, don't try to make it up by doing something that's kind of silly, but get one. And maybe it's winter term now the year before and you've just realized you're supposed to do this. You could get one this term, you could get one next term, and you could even get one next fall. So you could at least have 3 peer reviews in. It's not optimal. Don't strain it, especially if it's a case where it's clear that peer review is going to be pro forma rather than helpful. But do your best to pay attention to this from now on. Candidate can provide some things. These lists of teaching awards and supervised students, the department may have these, but I really think it's safest for these to come from the candidate. Separating out the different types of students and things is a good thing. Teaching portfolios provided by the candidate as a supplementary file. The intention there is not for it to be a copy of every syllabus and every exam that's been created by the candidate, but rather representative, illustrative examples of things that have been done. A foot-thick binder is probably not that useful to a review committee. In fact, it's easy to look at something that thick and decide that there isn't enough time. But pithy, central things, syllabus of a course the faculty member developed that he or she's particularly proud of, and a very creative examination, whatever it might be. Again, not exhaustive, but illustrative. Letters from students, seeing very few of these days, and I have to say I'm kind of happy about that. There are still some departments, I think, where there's a culture of this. Sometimes students send unsolicited letters. They're aware that a faculty member is being reviewed for promotion and they want to weigh in, and I think it's admirable that they care so much. Sometimes students are invited. Sometimes it's not clear who invited the students, and there's 40 letters from students, and there gets to be a sense perhaps of some desperation of trying to prove a point from a group of people who really don't have access to the full evaluation process or file or psyche or anything else. They may all, this may be the best teacher in the world, and that may absolutely be true, and the students fully appreciate that. But if it's the best teacher in the world and has not published or created a single piece of independent scholarship or creative practice, there's a problem. And the students aren't going to be aware of that. So honestly, I don't find review committees being particularly interested in student letters, although they are still welcome and they are read. For those of you that have created a file, what I just did was start in about the middle of the file. Well, but when it leaves the department, I start at the top, except there were a bunch of blank tabs that didn't have anything under them yet. For those at the faculty personnel committee at the university level, I started in the middle of the file, the vita, the statement, worked down to the bottom, and then into the supplementary file, additional materials provided here. And then for the rest of this, I'll work up from the vita, the things that get added after it leaves the department, because I think we have some college managers here as well. Supplementary file, make sure we know whose it is. That's usually pretty easy to figure out. Teaching evaluation information here. Primarily, this is the teaching portfolio, and then any signed student comments. Signed comments are not retained for perpetuity, so they shouldn't be put in the primary file. If you put them in the primary file, and it's easy for me, I will pull them out and put them in the supplementary file, but I'll grumble a little bit. And if you did two-sided copying, I'll be really upset because it's hard for me to get rid of those. Okay, so just don't put student written comments in the primary file. They go in a supplementary file only if they're signed. The online system, I believe, should only be giving you access to signed comments, so you don't have to worry about accidentally putting unsigned ones in, unless you ask your colleague, the candidate, to provide them, because he or she gets the full stack signed or unsigned. There are additional pieces to the supplementary file. First and foremost is what we might call the scholarship portfolio or the creative practice portfolio. For a chemist, I'll put every publication that I had since I was hired by the university into review period. I'll come back to that, I think. For a creative person, maybe you're a ceramicist, you probably don't want to provide a crate full of pots and vessels, but you can provide pictures. Similar for architects who do installations and artists and so on. But a comprehensive, I would say, compendium of the scholarship, the teaching portfolio. In red, the service portfolio was new under the CBA. I think there's a pretty good understanding of that now. If there isn't, you can ask me a question, although I'll probably defer you to the guidance that's provided through Academic Affairs website. And evidence of contributions to equity inclusion. If you are working from the current CBA, you saw that under the primary file contents, but that was a mistake. And the union and Academic Affairs agreed that that was a mistake. All the other portfolios are supplementary materials returned to the candidate as soon as the review is complete. That should be true of this evidence of contributions to equity inclusion also. Now we move up from the Vita tab. The next tab up is letters of evaluation. In terms of selections, the candidate, I've given up on writing to deans telling them this because it's not semantics, but it's not critical for me to establish in the record that this was true. A candidate is welcome to suggest reviewers. A candidate never selects reviewers. Only the supervisor does the selection. That selection typically will include some from the candidate's list. If the candidate has people that he or she doesn't want used for reasons that are usually professional conflicts, you should abide by that. Majority, again, I don't want to talk through all the details, but the majority of the reviewers should not have been suggested by the candidate. We give you waffle room. You, as a department head, maybe with your senior faculty, come up with a list of reasonable reviewers for your candidate. Then your candidate comes in with her list of suggested reviewers, and all of them are people that you had thought of. So now you say, well shoot, now I got to find a whole new set, and I just worked for 3 days trying to find a reasonable set. If you independently came up with the name of a reviewer before you learned that the candidate was going to suggest that reviewer, that one does not get coded as having been suggested by the candidate. Okay, so you're saved. You've read the rest of this already because I talked too much. I try to have us abide by professional conflict of interest rules. I figure if it's good enough for the government passing out federal tax dollars in the form of grants, it probably is good enough for us. We never should request. Sometimes we do, I think, by accident, sometimes because people think it might be a good idea. The student-mentor relationship is viewed as a lifetime conflict in the federal government. When I worked at National Science Foundation, I never reviewed a grant proposal from somebody I worked for, nor would I ever have reviewed a grant proposal from a former student of mine if I had been old enough to do that. Okay, same should be true here. Co-authors, NSF said 5-year window. So if you co-authored a paper earlier than 5 years ago with somebody, and now this person has submitted a proposal, that former co-author is an acceptable reviewer. Okay. So it's not a lifetime taint. Those are the official rules, and then there's things, of course, like family and relationships and things like that. The unofficial rule is if someone is placed in a position where they don't feel they can provide an unbiased review, or they feel they can, but they express discomfort for various reasons. We've been drinking buddies for 30 years. Err on the side of saying thank you, but let's not do that. It sounds like a conflict. Under this tab, include a single example of each major letter you use. Typically, the process, you write to a slate of prospective reviewers saying, hey, we've got Professor X coming up for promotion or tenure review. Would you be available to review the file? They say, yes, it's great. The next correspondence is a letter, and we have a draft of, I think, a very good letter that was updated recently. So if you're using a letter from more than a year ago, there's a better version available on Academic Affairs website now. The letter formally requesting the review, listing what materials are being provided, and the CV prescribes what's to be provided. The CV, the statement, the scholarship or creative practice portfolio, and the statement of P&T criteria from the unit in which the candidate resides. And then there's a set of questions that we spent a long time working and revising and re-revising and discussing, and I think they're a good set of questions. We used to say, would Professor X get tenure at your institution? And it's funny, a lot of people feel uncomfortable responding to that question because we're not talking about tenuring you at my institution, we're talking about tenure there. Yet a lot of review committees really like those responses just as a calibration point. The new question says something like, given what you know of the candidate's record of creative practice, would this record be supportive of a positive recommendation at your school? I think it kind of splits the difference. It recognizes we haven't asked these people to talk about service and teaching. It recognizes that institutions are different, yet at the same time it gives our internal reviewers some sense of what would happen somewhere else. If it's a chemist at Harvard, the answer is no, because we never tenure our own people at Harvard in chemistry. But reviewers know that. It gives them calibration. I can stop talking sometimes. I think this is, there's nothing new I need to notify you here. Okay, so you put in the letter asking are you available, you put in a copy of the letter saying thanks for agreeing, here's the stuff, here's what we're curious in knowing. You can put in your thank you letter too, although sometimes I wonder why we bother with that, but that's okay. If there are 17 other emails where the person's apologizing we're not having gotten to it yet, I was sick, I'm sorry, we don't really need those. It's the standard letters that we're looking for. Then you provide all the reviews. Sometimes you get unsolicited reviews, not often, but sometimes. Those are included as well. We could have a campus conversation about that at some point perhaps, but they are included. In red, I list if people, you wrote to them and said, we're considering Professor X for tenure, would you serve as a reviewer? And the person says, no, I'm sorry, I'm too busy, or you didn't offer to pay me and I only do these if I get paid, or something else, and we hear all those things. Include their correspondence at the end of the reviews tab. Our internal reviewers want to know who was contacted, not just who agreed. Okay? Oh, and if you do receive letters from students, even if they seem to be related to evaluations of the person, we place them as a matter of course in the teaching section, because our presumption is that students primarily are going to be commenting on the teaching and mentorship capabilities. Don't read that. Don't read that except to note that we do make sure to tell our external reviewers what the waiver status is. Okay, I already talked through most of this, I think. What materials are sent to reviewers? A list should be included in the evaluations tab as well. And against the statement of vita, the promotion and tenure criteria, and what work was sent. For me, it was easy because I published maybe 10, 15 papers. We could list them. We could even put links in. For a creative person where there's lots of publications or program guides and things like that, it could be more complicated. To the extent you can have a complete list, it would be good. I'm not sure if I'm supposed to talk about bargaining or not, so I won't put it in that context, but I'll say that I think it would be a good idea for the permanent file to have a list in it of everything that was in the supplementary file. Because that supplementary file gets returned at the end of the decision process, but the primary file is retained for 10 years, and questions come up sometimes, admittedly, usually if it's been a denial of promotion or tenure, but sometimes other questions as well. And those questions could oftentimes be easier to answer if there was recorded a complete listing of what we had referred to in the process. Okay, that's not required, but it wouldn't be disallowed either to include a table of contents of the supplementary material. In red, I should look at that. Published work during period under review. It's easy to figure out if it's a new assistant professor with no credit for prior service. What was published or created and communicated to the public in some way during the period of time this person was at the University of Oregon. Promotion from associate to full for someone who became associate here is easy too. What happened since that promotion? That's the stuff we should look at. Not the book that led to the promotion and tenure in the first place, but what happened since then. Okay, we try to, one way I describe this is scholarship counts once. Okay, we don't use the same piece of scholarship to support a second promotion. Okay, and Peg, I'm thinking of your earlier question. This really has been focused on the tenure-related faculty, but a lot of what I'm saying I think is equally relevant to non-tenure-related faculty. Question? Yeah, question about publications predating your hire at the University of Oregon. If it was a hire with no credit for prior service, really the focus is here. The CV will list those earlier publications. Reviewers will see the CV. They may be familiar with them, and we don't tell them not to comment, but the focus is on what happened here. Complexity can happen if there is credit for prior service. We gave you 3 years of credit. What was that credit for? Well, was it 3 years as an assistant professor somewhere else? Was it 3 years as a special fellowship postdoc? You know, there are various situations that lead to a discussion and conclusion that credit should be awarded for prior service. If there was credit for prior service, then the work that led to that credit being assigned should be included in the review. I always make things way too complicated, but they are. That last statement is true if the candidate uses the credit for prior service. But the CBA actually has excellent language about this. If the candidate chooses not to use that credit for prior service, then he or she will have spent a full 6-year period here, and that's the window we look at primarily. Doesn't mean they can't mention the other work, but really it's what happened here that's going to count. And if they use some of that credit, then the window slides a little bit, but picture a 6-year window as the primary focus. Okay. Also under the External Reviews tab is the biographical sketches, brief bio sketches. Here's an example of one that would suffice. What we're really looking for is where the person is, the rank of the person. Ideally, we want to see mostly full professors, especially for promotion to full professor, but even for promotion to associate professor. There are cases when the best person in the world is an associate professor. There are cases in the world, some newly evolving academic areas for which all the best people in the world are associate professors, and that's fine. But use this brief statement to establish these are the right people to review the candidate, and also make it clear if there's any connection to the person. If it was a doctoral mentor, well, don't write them. Don't ask them to do it. If you discovered it was a doctoral mentor to process, your relationship statement could say, although we didn't realize it when we requested the review, we learned that this was the doctoral mentor. If you knew that they were co-authors 10 years ago, say so. If you didn't know there was a relationship, they're bowling buddies, and you found out when the person submitted a review, don't say no known relationship, because maybe there wasn't one, but there is one now. Now you know about it. Put that in here. Okay, update your statement if you need to. Help the reviewers, the internal reviewers, know how to place these reviews. The fact that they're bowling buddies doesn't mean they don't provide a perfectly useful, important, maybe the most valuable review, but people want to know if there's a connection or not. At last, that was the end of the External Reviews tab. The next tab up is a departmental committee recommendation. Again, you can read all this stuff. Most units have a personnel committee within the department. Some don't. That's okay. Under this tab can be a statement saying we don't use a departmental committee. That's fine. You can see the length of things here. I should mention too, and I keep referring to our website, I last year created a series of guidance documents designed to help folks like you put these files together. Please look at them. I describe all of this information in maybe too much detail, but I think it's an area where a lot of detail is helpful. Then the department head weighs in. This is meant primarily to be an independent appraisal of the situation, although it typically starts with a discussion of the process, as you can see here. The two things I put in red, if it's an early case, it's a year early tenure decision, or it's someone who's only been associate professor for 4 years and the standard window is the same as the pre-tenure period. Don't just put it through knowing that, gosh, this person is so great that the promotion should happen. Comment specifically on the fact that it's early and state why it's appropriate for it to be done early. It's generally pretty obvious, but people really like to be told. And the review and appraisal is independent. Department committee was neutral to ambivalent or less about promotion. You disagree with them as department head, that's fine. Your report is your report. You present your recommendation. Okay. There's no expectation that you'll agree with your committee, although usually you do. The file then goes to the dean's office, unless you're in a school where or college where there are no departments, and it's been there all along, I guess. Each college has a personnel committee, whether it's called a faculty personnel committee or a dean's advisory committee, depends on which school or college you're in. Those are a group of elected faculty from within the school or college. You can see they are basically secondary reviewers. If they are in the candidate's department, they're going to be recused from the discussion. So the local expert in the candidate's field is not supposed to be involved here because he or she was involved in the department discussion. And that's a point I don't think I make here, but if there is a choice, a faculty member serving on an advisory committee, should that person weigh in at the department level or the advisory committee level? Maybe they're on the university FPC. Where should they weigh in? The answer is the lowest level at which you can engage. And the reason for that is to avoid any appearance of inappropriate influence. For example, let's say you are a minority opinion in a department that thinks your colleague should be awarded tenure. You disagree for whatever reasons. You say, well, I'm on the faculty personnel committee for the university, so I'm going to recuse myself from any discussions at the department. You then meet at the FPC, the final review before and that recommendation goes to the provost, and you attempt to sway the other members of that committee with your negative concerns about this colleague. It's the wrong place for you to have that much influence. That should be a discussion in the department with the other experts in your field. Okay, so participate at the lowest level possible. Sometimes personnel committees ask for more information. They will request that through the deans, and the dean then will ask if he or she feels it's appropriate, a department head or probably a department head to provide additional material. It doesn't happen all that often, although some advisory committees some years seem to ask for more than others. Same can happen at the faculty personnel committee level. I ask that committee to communicate through me. I do an initial filter of the request. And basically I'm looking to say, is this information that is essential for you to make a decision, or is it something you're curious about? And if it's something you're simply curious about, but whatever the answer is doesn't change your decision, then let's not ask a candidate in a highly stressful process to be more stressed than ever by looking for more stuff late. Okay, so we're looking for substantive things. That could be a case of a book that was under contract but was in final revision at the time the file was put forth through the department. Dean's Advisory Committee would like to know, have the revisions been made? That's really important. If they don't ask, I will. Okay, this recommendation goes under a separate tab. It then goes to the dean, who does basically what a department head does, but now from the dean's level, adding an independent evaluation and recommendation to the file. The advantage of reviewing later in the file is that you know the whole earlier file is there. You don't have to say the same things again and again. You can particularly focus on addressing things that maybe weren't adequately addressed. Everyone says, superb teacher, and you look at the teaching record and you see a term where the quantitative evaluations were 2s. And say, well, how come nobody talked about that? Somebody's going to see that. It's our human nature to look for the unusual things and focus on them. So make sure somebody has talked about that. Department heads, save your dean the trouble. Take care of that yourselves before the dean sees it. If it's an early promotion and nobody's talked about it yet, deans, somebody's got to talk about it, and it's going to be up to you. I guess this is important if there are dean's office folks here. The dean will always meet with candidates after he or she has decided what he or she is going to recommend in terms of promotion or not, tenure or not. That discussion happens whether it's going to be positive or negative. I guess I just said that, sorry. And just talks through, doesn't read the external letters, but basically provides highlights of the reasoning behind the decision. CBA calls for 3 days notice. Good luck trying to line up a busy faculty member and a dean with less than 3 days' notice anyhow, but it does require 3 days' notice. If the candidate is a member of the bargaining unit, he or she is entitled to bring a representative, whether or not a union representative, to that meeting with you. So don't be surprised if any of you are here. The candidate can request a redacted copy of the report you've written at the time. It's easier to redact if you don't mention reviewers by identifying characteristics. But if you do, we can help you redact to make sure that their identities aren't revealed. We ask you not to provide any other materials at that time. In what you're reading ahead of me here, those requests typically come as an appeal of a negative decision. I've only once in 8 years of doing this had a request for access to a P&T file from a successful candidate. And those typically would then come through a request to the academic, or through the provost to academic affairs. Oh, I knew there was something else I wanted to say. Candidate is provided 10 days to respond in writing to the dean's recommendation if he or she chooses. Usually, again, that's in cases where the dean is not feeling positively inclined toward promotion or tenure, but it can happen in a case even when a dean is supporting the promotion or tenure as well. Candidate is 10 days. It's probably best, unless it's late in the season, for you to hold on to that promotion file until the 10-day period has passed, or until it's clear to the candidate. Might make it clear, I'm not planning to submit a letter, I am planning to submit a letter. If we get the file and process it forward and then a letter from the candidate arrives, it can complicate things a little bit. So if it's normal season, you're not late with files, hang on to it for 10 days after the meeting to make sure that letter's not going to materialize, and then forward to academic affairs. It's getting late enough now that I'd say make judgment calls. If it's a positive recommendation, an enthusiastic recommendation, very unlikely a letter is going to come in. I think we're safe having you forward that. If it's a negative recommendation, you really better wait. And if it was a kind of neutral but semi-positive, you have the sense the candidate's going to respond, you better think about waiting on that one too. The final thing that you'd put into the file is the unit's evaluation criteria. Those exist. They are on record through Academic Affairs website. They are undergoing revision, or will be shortly, sometimes not requiring much. The practice, I'm not even going to say it here, but because I don't remember what the decision was. Well, I'll say it. I believe the plan is for a candidate, if the evaluation criteria change, the candidate has the option of choosing to be evaluated under the ones that were in force at the time he or she was hired, or the newly adopted ones. And that decision is captured in writing. Voting summary, pretty self-describing, I think. There's a checklist that you will fill out. Many of you have done this already. It's revised, or will be revised a little bit, because I'm to the point where I wanted to get to at last. That's not too bad. And I'm going to even let you go early unless we have a lot of discussion. All of that was what goes into constructing the P&T file before it leaves a college or school and goes to academic affairs. I guess I should ask, are there any questions about mechanics or process before I go into this? Yes?
I have a question about cases where a faculty member has either has a position or a service responsibility in a unit that's outside the department and outside the college. That person may say, could I get input from the supervising person or the chair of the committee? First of all, presumably we say yes, but what level does that come in?
Yeah, the question is about candidates who may have positions, multiple positions, maybe one within a department, one in another department or unit, maybe not even in the same school or college. Ideally, how that will work is spelled out in a document that's on file and be included in the conditions of employment tab. If it's not, we should,
My question
no?
would say service elimination, which is the department would have no vision of that. But the committee may wish to say something about that person.
Yeah, okay, I see. So I was misunderstanding. So as an example, someone serving on a committee that may be university level, the department may be somewhat remotely related to it. They won't know how to evaluate that quality of service. That could be a good opportunity for an invited internal letter where the chair of the committee or the convener of the committee could be asked to comment on the candidate's service. That could be something that the candidate, him or herself, would like to request. I might be inclined to do that if I were a candidate, wondering whether people appreciated what I was doing or not. But if I were a department head for a candidate who hadn't done that, I might consider whether I could add that complexity to the file. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, well then let me do this, and this will maybe be simpler than I thought because Gretchen got me some good news today. Digital dossier, everything I showed you is a piece that was ultimately placed into a printed copy of a file that would typically be 100 to 200 pages, sometimes more, kept for 10 years. We have large boxes of these files. In the last recorded history, these documents were all created or received electronically, then printed out and placed in a file. And I would say that as I've surveyed the universe of universities granting promotion and tenure, that people haven't made a tremendous amount of progress, but I have for quite a while thought that we could maybe do better than that. Particularly given that over the past 3 years or so, the Faculty Personnel Committee has requested electronic access to documents, and so as I've said earlier, we would take these hundreds of pages of documents, deconstruct them, scan them so that we had a PDF, and provide that file. And that, taking electronic files, printing them, and scanning them back into digital form is a little ridiculous. I'd been trying to develop a way that would just automate the entire process, and it would be beautiful and wonderful and businesslike, and that won't happen in my lifetime. But as a green chemist who lectures around the world about how waiting until you have the perfect solution isn't the best thing, but instead doing something that's better, like, by the way, we're doing for Columbia 150 starting next term, it will be better, a lot better. It won't be great, it'll be better. Maybe it'll be great. I learned about PDF portfolios. I'm not a Luddite, but I'm also not the most literate in computer things. But I figured out how to create a PDF file to which one could add documents. And it struck me that that was probably a good thing to do. That would be better than what we do now. So I created a digital dossier. It's a single document to which you upload all the pieces. I created it using Adobe Acrobat 9 Pro, and then I distributed it to a couple test departments, and the ones that had Acrobat 9 Pro were really excited, and the ones that didn't said, this thing doesn't work, because it turns out it doesn't. So that was going to be a big problem until Gretchen learned this morning that the university has a license for Adobe Acrobat 9 Pro. So if you don't have it, you can have it. And I would even say you should have it. It's really pretty cool. It lets you do lots of great stuff. And Gretchen's going to add for me here.
Can I possibly see a raise of hands who know that you have Pro? That's good to know. It's very good to know.
Gretchen is preparing a communication to IT specialists in each school or college, warning them that they're about to be asked to install 9 Pro on 500 computers. But maybe that's not true. It sounds like quite a few if you have it already. But you can get this at no charge. And if you've been using Acrobat, you'll really like Acrobat Pro. You can do more stuff with it. Once you have that, we'll provide you with this, I'll call it the shell document maybe for simplicity, as a single file we're still talking. I'm going to show you a slide in a few minutes. We still have some details to work out. That's what I want to work about with you a little bit. You'll open it up and you'll get this fancy welcome screen that basically tells you what to do, and it's really pretty easy. And I will show you. You start by clicking Get Started. If you open it up and you don't see that welcome screen, as some people were finding, it's because your Adobe is set to some different Open Documents as setting. But if you look in that red circled area, one of those icons, I think it's the fourth from the left, says Open the Welcome Page. So if you want to see the welcome page and you didn't, you can click that icon and then you'll see it. If you're seeing this directly, what you're seeing are the different tabs and checklists that go into a P&T dossier. Okay? I'll show you some details. The third one from the left says unit criteria, and it's got the yellow band just like in the print copies that we provide you. If you double click on that, you see this. If you double click where it says unit P&T criteria, you'll have the chance to change the name of that page. That's not very useful, so double click somewhere else until you see this. From here, then you go up, there's a document menu. The type is tiny on here, sorry, but you'll pick document menu, insert pages from file, and then it opens up and you can browse around and find the file you want to add in. You click on it, say select, and then I didn't do screenshots of everything. I will in a tutorial that we're planning to put together. It'll then say, do you want to insert pages before or after the current page? You say after because you were on the separator, and your document will be in the PDF. That's pretty cool. And it's pretty easy if you're looking at this tab. Or the CV tab, maybe it's a little more complicated because there was the original and then there was an update. Okay, so you got to upload 2 files. But it's really as easy as going to where you want to put the pages, document, insert pages from file, and find it. So as you're collecting these things, maybe of course you wrote to the external reviewers through email. Save a copy of that email, maybe in a folder and name the name of the candidate. When the person responds, save their response to that file. Maybe it had an attachment that was the actual signed letter. Save that. You don't even need to cover email if the letter itself is signed. And then when you're constructing here, you can add these pieces in. It's a little bit of work. I've talked about other systems. We looked at a sort of an online job application system that we could probably recruit to this, and we were talking this morning. I said, that will require everybody at the university to learn how to do this, or their piece of it. And doing this just requires the office managers. So sorry, but I decided that I'd rather try to teach the office managers than to teach everybody at the university. It's no different really than collecting these things in print form and then having to assemble the print dossier when it's to get it ready to go forward. Except in the long run, I think it's easier, and I might add it makes it cleaner and prettier too. Okay, so that's how you get stuff in. The external reviews tab, there's going to be all sorts of documents you have to upload, but again, you're already putting those all in folders and placing them and making multiple copies and punching holes and realizing that you punched the holes in the top and you were supposed to punch in the side or whatever. So in the long run, this is going to take some learning. I'm planning to work with you. We'll talk about whether an in-person workshop or one-on-one training or a YouTube video or a print thing with lots of screenshots is most useful, but it's going to be easier. I really believe that for everybody, and I know I believe it for the poor folks in academic affairs who have been disassembling these things and scanning them into PDF form. There are a couple fillable forms in here that I think will be useful. Please make them useful. I spent way too much time creating these. Most things you type in, just like you would on however you're filling out the forms now. I actually don't know how you're filling those out probably. I put in some pull-down menus to make things simpler. There's a checkbox for whether the person is a member of the bargaining unit or not. I hope you all can figure that out, although it's an interesting question perhaps. It's hidden behind my pull-down here because I took a screenshot at the wrong time. It will probably be set so that either you pick yes or no, but if you don't pick something, it'll be yes, as opposed to a blank box. It's either picked or not. Boxes can be checked. Text boxes can be filled out. It really works pretty well. Same for the voting summary page and same for the teaching evaluations checklist as well, okay? This will be moot, I think, if you're all working pro. We had some of these files arrive from the dean's office not as single documents anymore, but as 12 or 14 individual files. And I thought that was a problem with the program. It turned out it was a problem with the advisory committee in that college, who said we want each file as a separate file. Each piece of the file as a separate file. And I thought maybe another workshop would be good to show people how to use PDFs and how the bookmark menu looks like if you open it up on the side. It's easy to use, but we're not all up to speed on it. So there will be some training that needs to be done for other folks as well, and we'll take care of that. What works reliably, so I thought they saved, and it ended up saving just one piece, and they had to save more. They actually had to work to save these 14 different pieces separately. So this probably isn't a problem. To be safe, get to the home screen, save portfolio as something. You might consider naming it the name of the candidate and perhaps the department, as I suggested here. Once you save it, before you forward it, we all do this, right? We actually look to see what it looks like and realize we just saved the first page instead of the whole thing or whatever. So make sure it's all there. And we've got a single file, digital. We never had to print anything out. And we're good to go. And here's the work part. We still have some details, not insignificant details, to work out. And I've kind of decided that after thinking about and talking about this and piloting it with a few selected departments and deans, that it's time to jump into the deep end and see if we can swim. I don't think it can go too bad, especially since you're all meeting me. You know that I'm aware that there could be issues, and I am available to help you. First thing we're a little bit worried about is if we get 50 P&T files and the deans hadn't let us know that we should expect any of them. Well, we're smart enough to know that we should have expected them. We're doing the same thing, I should say, for NTTF promotions. That shell document is available as well. There we have a less solid sense of what workload we might expect, and we would really like to be able to anticipate. I think Barbara Altman wouldn't mind not having 350 digital promotion dossiers for NTTF delivered to her in mid-March. If she knows they're coming, she might still prefer not to have it happen, but at least there could have been some planning. So we're going to have to figure out how to notify academic affairs. Tenure-related ones, I think it's simple. We'll keep sending the same requests to the deans at the time we've sent them in the past, asking them to alert us to likely promotion and or tenure cases. For NTTF, we're going to have to work out the messaging and the timing, and maybe that's something we'll talk about here, or maybe it's something we can just figure out. We have to figure out how to get the digital shell document to you. Simplest might be for us to stick it on a USB drive and give it to you, along with stern admonitions about not losing it once it's filled out with confidential information and things like that. Whenever we worry about confidentiality of digital files, I think about the fact that we seem not to be worried about confidentiality of paper files, and we bring them home with us in our briefcases and sit them on our car seat while we go in for dinner. And we shouldn't, but these things happen. There are security issues with everything. Electronic, it's maybe a little easier to do something kind of inappropriate, like emailing it to the wrong person or printing it and realizing, wait, it didn't come out on my printer. I wonder what printer it was sent to. We need to be aware of these things, but I think we all can handle that. And then once you've got the shell, how are we going to submit it? The third bullet's the easiest. You bring the thing to us. Well, that's not fair. It's all digital. Why should we have to bring it to you? Well, it's better, and it's pretty safe and secure without concerns about freedom of information requests or inadvertent emails and things like that. And I haven't talked about supplementary materials, but I haven't developed the document for those to be digital yet. Some of you have. There are some departments that provide access to a website, say, for their reviewers, and they've got all the documents are uploaded there. That would be easy. For people that make things and take pictures, I don't know, people, let's go to the extreme, someone who's published a book. Do you have a full digital version of the book? Maybe. Things are changing, maybe not. So there's details there. I think for the time being, the supplementary material, it's not my highest priority to figure out how to make it possible to submit that entirely digitally. The primary file is. When you bring us the supplementary materials, you can bring us the USB drive at the same time. We could also, I think, and we is a general term, and it doesn't mean me in any sense, establish a website that had appropriate confidentiality so that you could upload the things you need to do. Maybe by email, though I want to have general counsel comment on discoverability of things that are sent by email. We've all had a few opportunities to think about that in recent history. Maybe some other system, a confidential shared drive, for example, we could establish. So I don't know if any of that is worth discussing, but if you have ideas about it, I'd be happy to hear it now, and that's kind of what we have left to do. The only last point on here is about the archiving issue. That's an important issue. We have to keep these files for 10 years. We need to have further discussions about how this will happen. I have to believe that a digital archive is acceptable, but we don't have that established yet. We may by the time you're constructing files, but then we have also other questions about what do department heads like to have to look at to review a case, or what do deans like to have, or what does the FBC want, or what does the provost want? And I've seen transition from paper to digital before. I spent 10 years with the NSF at the time we went from paper to digital submission of proposals, and importantly, from paper to digital submission of proposals to external reviewers for their review. And the first couple of years, the reviewers hated us and said, you're just pushing your printing costs onto us because you send us these things and we need to print them out so we can review them. And at some point, people realized that you can actually read digital documents on a computer. And most of them stopped printing things out. But some people still really like them, and I might be one of them mostly, so that I can scribble in the margins and highlight things and all that. Well, you know what you can do with Acrobat Pro? you can do that. So I think it's probably, bottom line, next year we still want one printed copy, because there's going to be somewhere along the line who really wants one, and I think it'll be good for us to have it. It solves the archiving question for the short term, because we'll still have one to archive the way we always archive them. And bottom line is they're easy to create. Either as you receive documents, print one copy, stick them in a file, and you'll have it. Or even easier, chemistry. If you know Diane Lochenmeyer in chemistry, she was one of our guinea pigs this year, and she loved this thing. And I'll tell you, the chemistry dossier looks beautiful this year, because she just constructed it all digitally and then printed it out when it was done. And all the pages are straight, and there's not crooked things that were scanned wrong. It really makes a very nice archival print copy. Okay, so we're going to ask you to prepare one. Also, so that we have a double check. Let's say something comes in, look a little funny in the digital file, we can look at the print file and see what was meant to be there and make sure it's accurate. I got a feeling that print copy will go away within the year, but for this year, we're going to ask for it. Question?
You brought up digital submissions over the years, and that's something that this year my department is thinking about how we can submit those. For example, Dropbox isn't necessarily a secure option, email is. Are we thinking about ways that we can start sending these packets to some of these archives?
Yes, the question for the video is, are we thinking about ways to provide materials to external reviewers electronically? Some departments are doing it already, and I'm wishing that I could remember which ones they were. Anybody here want to volunteer? Yes. Okay.
We do it sort of a hybrid method. I put everything on a thumb drive and then mail it with in FedEx.
Okay, so one response is to put everything on a USB drive and FedEx it to reviewers. There are other departments that are creating websites, password-protected websites, and referring their, once an external reviewer agrees to review, they provide them the site address and the password, and they log in and they can see everything there. So I guess yes is the answer, and that, should I take that on as a personal responsibility? Or I got a feeling that's one that I'm seeing solutions created locally, and I would prefer people to have a solution that they like that works for them. But if you're uncertain as to how to proceed, let's make sure I'm sure every department that is doing it that way would be delighted to share information about how they do it. So how should I proceed with that? Why don't you, if your unit or school or college or whatever you might be would like information about that, why don't you send me an email, and I will connect you to people that are taking various approaches to digital presentation of material to the external reviewers.
Well, and that's wonderful to have that resource, but also I think you can create ways to do that. Like, what I'm lacking is a resource to tell us ways we shouldn't do that. Like, for example, my first thought was something on drop-off, but then I discovered, okay, well, that's not considered by the university a safe way to transmit those material. So a website is an excellent idea. I just don't know, maybe the solution that I came up with would not be one that's recommended.
Yeah, so if there are concerns about whether an approach should be appropriate or not, ask, and we'll see what we can figure out. I'll tell you, we're looking at products. I mentioned one obliquely a while back. It's designed to support the hiring process. So a prospective employee logs in, creates a login information, uploads application materials, can request letters of recommendation to be sent, and those are, the reviewers get an electronic notification and are told how to upload their document. I guess this is a system where I said in the end we have to train everybody how to use it, but they only have to learn how to use a piece of it, so maybe it's not so bad. It constructs a hiring portfolio that, if the program is versatile, could potentially be as complicated as a P&T portfolio, I suppose. So we'll continue to look at those options and see if there's something that could work for us more generally in that regard. It would be the still better approach to doing what we're trying to do. These aren't great discussion points, but any other comments about these?
So I was involved in an activity in the UK last year where there was a lot of confidential information on the materials that we had to be able to review. And essentially, Kensington is the company that does it. On a USB drive, essentially when you plug it in, you then have to provide the appropriate password for it to then turn around and mount the material that's confidential as a disk that you can then manipulate. And it works on both Macintosh as well as
Mm-hmm.
PCs. And we had to do all of our work on that drive. All of the information had to be on there so it could be subject to freedom of information requests and things like that. And so that would seem to be a workable solution, both in terms of we have to ask you for a drive with the thing on it, and then we have to provide it back to you, so it kind of provides the physical manifestation of the portfolio that you send out now, so you know that somebody's planning on doing that. Plus it does keep it very private.
Mm-hmm.
And then you still need some kind of other system that can have electronic access to the materials to the external.
That's great. I'm realizing you weren't on mic, and the video might not have heard that, but basically Joe Sventek, who's the department head from Computer and Information Sciences, I have to add, actually suggested that there are basically in the can systems that could work for some of these provision of the shell document receipt with additional confidentiality guarantees on it that could be useful. So Joe's going to let me know more about that offline, I think. Excellent. Yes.
Joe, is there any, aside from the confidentiality part, is there any concerns that 100 different thumb drives out there might get infected with a virus and then you bring it in centrally and then that causes problems, or is that not? You know, only take one thumb drive with a virus that somehow wreak havoc overall.
Well, I don't mean, essentially the UK government didn't seem to be concerned about that, and these guys are about as paranoid as you can find.
Okay.
So I presume they checked that out. Basically, until the thing is actually mounted, and you had to provide a really complex password to it. You had to come up with a password that was sufficiently safe that they felt nobody could break it. But if you've got, if you're plugging it into a machine that's already infected and it's busy messing things up, then probably shouldn't let your machines get infected. That's my recommendation.
For the video, there was discussion of,
I just took you wireless. You're free. You can wander. You don't have to talk in there anymore.
okay.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm comfortable here. This reminds me of one other thing I thought is, let's say you're journalism, you have 5 cases due November 30th, so that's pretty easy. I've saved the 5 cases on my thumb drive, and I think that works. Let's say you're CAS with 45 cases, and you don't want to run across the street 45 times, so you think, well, I'll just save them all and bring them all over on March 15th. We've talked about what happens then. So I think in the longer run, we're going to want to have something other than simply physically bringing the drive over to encourage timely flow of documents.
Have you considered like something similar to what Bradway was doing? Where you upload all the documents that the applicants are providing? They upload all their information, their transcripts, everything else. Would that not work similarly? And it's password protected. We have to have a password to get in it, and they have to create a password to use it.
The short answer is I haven't looked at that specific system. Longer is that it's related to other things we have looked at.
Okay.
And in the end, I really think that what we're trying to do here is take a step. And I'm also trying my best. Sure. Tried my best to minimize the learning that's required to do this. And so if it's, I think I'm overestimated the difficulty in running some of these things. So this job application system, same sort of sense as the GradWeb system. You're prompted to provide things, and it probably works pretty well. When I first started worrying about or thinking about digital promotion files a few years ago, I looked at other universities, and I stopped looking when I hit one that seemed to have the most advanced system, and they had this remarkable discussion of the responsibilities of each person and what they needed to do. The candidate shall create 12 documents with the following names and put them in individual folders on this drive. And it was so intrusively complicated that I said, we'll spend academic affairs time scanning files and making them digital. It's just too hard for everybody else. But I think the systems are changing pretty quickly, and we'll certainly keep looking at them. And if we have an epiphany before any of you need the shell document to start creating digital dossiers, and we think there's a simpler and better process, we'll do that. But I have a hunch that we'll give this a go for a year at least, and my hunch honestly is that it's going to be painless and easy enough that we may decide, these things aren't real problems. Those are just trivial considerations that we'll figure out over the next month or so. And creating the dossier is easy, and one person per department or one person per unit has to learn how to do something different than how they've done things before. And that, if I integrate the amount of learning and training that's required, it might be the best way to do it. But I'm absolutely open to many ongoing discussions about this.
Ken, when did you say the shell document would be available?
The shell is available now. And I'm resisting the temptation to try to make the 2 little subsections on the checklist line up exactly instead of being offset by a millimeter. So it's ready now. We can provide it at any time.
Are faculty going to be, are you going to tell faculty at the P&T training that's coming that this is an option, or are you going to recommend that they do this?
Am I going to tell faculty about it? I want them to, but I want to be careful. We noticed in the, this is related, NTTF promotion process calls for, it's different. Here, tenure-related, department head tells a tenure candidate, hey, it's time to put your file together. NTTF promotion, the notification is on the NTTF side. They tell a department head, hey, I want to get promoted, and I think it's time. And that notification in the CVA comes with provision of a CV and a statement, a bunch of stuff. So we're getting requests for the promotion dossiers from the NTTF candidates. And the expectation is not that the candidate has to construct their own dossier. It's really, the flow of work should be the same as before, or the same as always. So the candidate will provide a CV and a statement, and the department then will begin the construction of the dossier, whether it's physical or electronic. But so what difference does it make to the candidate? Well, I guess if a candidate is printing out his CV and the department says, hey, we're doing it digitally, so that you don't need to print it, just send me the electronic file. That should be the only change as far as the faculty member is concerned.
Is there any resistance by faculty to an electronic copy, though? The university I came from, there was.
Is there resistance to a digital copy?
Yeah, rather than the physical copy.
I have no answer to that, but it's an interesting question. That's the sort of question where I'm tempted to do two things. One is to ask for a feel of the audience, and the other is to recognize that we have a university senate where one can always float these sorts of questions to see what their response might be. Let's do the one I could do right now and get the feel of the audience. Can other people comment? Does anybody have a feeling for what faculty response might be to the notion that their file exists in digital form instead of print form? Yeah, I'll let you start.
Well, we take faculty files for the merit review and other review processes electronically. So I would suspect that with enough information and demonstration of security and ease of constructing the dossier, that it would be well received. But I don't know who would be, it would be from the department head that this is an option. Correct?
Well,
It's not an option, right? This is what we're doing.
The intention is to say this is how we'll submit files starting next year. But you're giving me pause. I'm with you that with appropriate security guarantees, which we will make. I don't know, it's 2015, that doesn't mean somebody can't come up with an objection, but other than the concern about security, which I typically address twofold. One is to say we'll do the best one can do with digital security, and these documents and the evaluations and things are already flowing digitally now. And the other is to note that whatever concern I might have about a thumb drive or a file that I keep on my computer, I'm more concerned honestly about the security of the print document that I've created, the early draft that I put in the recycling bin or something. I think in the end, I'm hoping there's a level of comfort with digital materials now that suggests that maybe there's no greater risk of security on them than print documents, and maybe less.
Thank you.
Francis, did you want to add?
Yes, I was going to ask for those parts of the file that have to be signed. So, for example, the CV that have to be signed, are you allowing digital signatures?
Joe is shaking his head no. We accept letters from external reviewers that are unsigned, and we have them accompanied by the email of transmittal. So I guess, tell me, Joe, why you were shaking your head no.
I'm just shaking my head because that's not automatically supported inside of Acrobat Pro. Right, so if that's the tool, and it's a very good tool, actually you can create your own little stamps in there from a bitmap image. So I have my signature in the environment for Acrobat Pro, and when I need to sign something, I just go ahead and tell them, you know, I've got the PDF, I just say, put the signature there and away you go.
I do the same thing for, say I'm writing letters of recommendation for former students. I have my signature digitally and I just plop it into my document.
Just to follow up on that, for our issue is faculty members who may be on research leave and unreachable, except to do a digital signature.
Yeah, well, I've seen a number of cases of faculty personnel or departmental reports this year where one or more members were absent. They were away on sabbatical, and there was a signature page for the document. Those that were there had signed. There were blanks for the others, and I was ready to write to the dean and say we're missing signatures. And you turn the page, and there's an email saying, "I'm on sabbatical. This is my endorsement of the recommendation." So we seem to be creating ways to support these issues that have they passed every level of scrutiny and review and approval. I don't know if anything ever will, but we seem to be comfortable with them. Any other thoughts about faculty response? Anybody concerned that?
I can. I'm not so much concerned, but I can visualize that faculty who were concerned would be less concerned about security than about stability of the file. And as you mentioned earlier, there's a possibility of a slip between the electronic file if you print it out from that. If the electronic file isn't complete, neither will the print copy be, so everything is vulnerable in some way. But I think you're right, it's 2015, people are comfortable with the electronic universe, but maybe there's a little bit of possibility for an anxiety spike around the actual completeness of the file as opposed to its security.
Yeah, and I should add that I still review the files completely to make sure that I can be as petty a bureaucrat as I've ever been and looking to make sure everything is done correctly, and I continue to do so. Others, Joe?
Well, I was just going to say that if you're using something that people are really sensitive about in terms of stability and completeness, you better be sure that your systems are being backed up correctly so that you can recover things if something goes wrong, because it's not always malicious intent that's screwing things up.
Oh, no.
So as long as you're following the normal backup procedure you use on your file storage here on campus, it should be just fine.
And if there were,
You trust all of your money to a bank that does this all the time. We'll have equivalent kinds of protection in terms of who has access.
if there were a dispute to the candidate would, of course, kept all the copies of things he or she prepared. The department will have their version, the dean will have their version, and so we can cross compare. I think there's, yes, back here.
So just to clarify on the hard copy that is needed for the deans of our college, it's just the one read? What about the supplemental files? Do you want just one supplemental hard file or 5 of them?
I believe there's only ever been a single supplementary file.
Okay. Couldn't remember. Thank you.
And if it's convenient to create that digitally, if there is no prescribed format for a supplementary file, so there's no requirement for there to be a shell. You could provide all the supplementary material digitally if it works for your candidate.
Okay. And then back to Gina's question, though, you said that chemistry or someone had made a beautiful hard copy just printing from the digital one. But then how can the reviewers compare the digital one to the hard copy then to see any differences? Because they would be the same, right?
They're supposed to be.
Correct, but it's, so if something were missing, the expectation is I catch that when I do my scrutiny before I release it to the FBC.
And hopefully we catch it too.
Yeah, hopefully you catch it first, right? I don't mind if I don't have anything to catch.
Yeah. Thank you.
So it used to be one copy had originals in it, original signatures from everybody that was supposed to sign. Is that kind of going away now, or?
So I'll call it an observation. before a question, was
Okay.
that we used to, the red copy typically, people recognize it was the archival copy, and when you got letters from external reviewers, the red copy is usually the one that has the original letterhead and the colored ink signatures, you can tell it's not a copy. Is that going away? It's sort of been going away from the reviews, at least, in the sense that most of our reviewers seem to be sending things digitally now with their signatures bitmapped in. Although there's still a surprising number, maybe, of letters that were clearly mailed. If a reviewer mails you a letter and doesn't send it electronically, well, you'll have the original, you'll need to scan it to put it into electronic form, and I'd file the original. So as if documents appear in print form and not digitally, then I would stick those in my folder and use those to populate the archival file. But I don't really think it's critical. I'll tell you, I've never returned a file to a dean because I thought that the red copy didn't have an originally ink-signed letter in it. All right, well, I think it's winding down, and I offered to end early. It's not as early as I thought, but 10 till. I'll stay for a while if you have other questions. My email is here. I'm pretty easy to find, and I try to be as responsive as I can. Thank you.